The first scene of The Contractor features James Harper, a member of the Army's elite special forces. James is married to the lovely Brienne Harper, and they have a son, now 8 years old, whom they adore. James has been recovering from a major knee injury he sustained in Afghanistan by way of rehabilitation and treatment. James received a call from military officials a few days later to tell him that he had been dismissed with honor due to health reasons. However, he will get no severance pay because his medical expenses have already been covered. James's departure from the military was difficult for him, but he was unable to prevent it. At home, James broke the news to his wife that he had been laid off without any sort of severance package. He appeared perplexed since they had numerous bills to pay but not enough savings to cover their expenses for the next few months. Brienne, though, tries to reassure him that everything is going to be okay and that they would figure out a solution together. While James was working on the roof that night, Brienne broke the news that James' best buddy, Mason, had committed suicide. James' best friend in the unit was Mason, a former soldier who, like James, had been laid off a few months ago. Seeing how scared Brienne was, James embraced her and reassured her that he would never abandon his own family, even in such a trying time. Later that day, at Mason's burial, a man named Mike approached James. Mike is revealed to be James' previous superior in the Special Forces military unit. Nevertheless, Mike too departed the service after being fired for similar reasons as James. Even so, Mike and James are on excellent terms, so Mike has invited James to dinner with his family. In addition, since Mike had relocated, they had not seen each other for a considerable amount of time. In the evening, Mike invited James over for supper, and the two spent the time chatting and sharing anecdotes about their lives. Mike and James sat down to watch a football game and have a conversation after supper. Mike mentioned to her that he now works for a private corporation where he is paid significantly more. Since James still hadn't found a new work at the moment, he took advantage of this opportunity to ask for his help in getting hired by the corporation. In addition, he has just received notices to promptly pay bills and other home expenses. The following day, Mike introduced James to his employer, Rusty. At work, before employing James, Rusty warned him that the job's missions posed a significant risk. James had no choice but to take the position and incur the risks involved given his present financial situation. From their talk, we learn that Rusty, like James, served in the military before leaving to start his own business. He added that James need not worry about getting detained in the future for carrying out the mission because all missions from his firm got permission and direct assistance from the government. James' first assignment after joining the team was to go undercover in Berlin for a couple of weeks. James returned home and informed Brienne of his new, well-paying work. However, the position needed him to travel internationally for around 2 weeks, to which she reluctantly agreed. James flew to Berlin the following day, where he checked into a hotel that Mike had reserved for him. A lady named Katia, who identified herself as one of Rusty's men, came into James' hotel room a few hours after he checked in. There, she tells James to spy on a biological scientist named Salim / who is known to have cooperated with terrorist organizations to develop biological weapons. After gathering his supplies that afternoon, James set out for his first trip that night. All of Salim's time at home and in the lab where he does his study is meticulously recorded by him. James spent days following Salim and obtaining the necessary information before he received a message from Katia instructing him to report at the base. James met with Mike and Katia and another co-worker named Bobby once he arrived at the headquarters. Specifically, Salim is creating an extremely lethal biological weapon that he plans to sell to key terrorist groups. As Mike describes, their objective is to eliminate Salim and then steal the biological weapon research data from his lab. They had to be cautious, though, because the laboratory's security system was linked to the local police station. In case the Berlin police managed to encircle them, they could always escape into the nearby woodland and then use the river tunnels. They spent the night before their planned departure arming themselves with all they would need. James and the squad arrived at the site and proceeded to stealthily knock out the guards one by one in order to gain entry to the lab. Once they located Salim, they immediately demanded that he turn over all of his study materials by threatening him. After that, Mike gives James the task of killing Salim and tells Bobby to upload all the files to their computer. Hearing this, Salim begged James again not to kill him, explaining that he was merely a scientist whose work may save the lives of millions. Along with that, he had James help him lock away a copy of his study data in a bank vault that only his wife had the key to. James, however, did not believe Salim and promptly injected him with a poison that would ensure his death. Once James was sure that Salim was no longer alive, he deliberately destroyed the lab and made it look like Salim had died in a fire. Nonetheless, as they were leaving the lab, 2 police cars approached them, and a gunfight between the police and Mike's men seemed inevitable. Katia and Bobby were killed in the gunfight, while Mike was wounded in the leg. James, sensing that their situation was rapidly deteriorating, hurriedly dragged Mike to the forest so that they might take refuge in the tunnel beneath the river. Once they surfaced, Mike and James rested for a while so that James could tend to the bullet wound in Mike's leg. Mike had lost so much blood that he was in severe condition. and so he had to do a blood transfusion right away. Since Mike was feeling better, they had planned to head back to base as soon as possible, but James' knee ailment flared up again and rendered him unable to walk. He told Mike to give the research data to Rusty now, and he would do the same when his leg had healed. Mike had to leave James and go to Rusty first to pass over the information for the sake of the mission. Mike dropped James with instructions to stay at a place named the Salvina Hotel until he returned. When James' knee felt better, he followed Mike's previous recommendations and checked into the Hotel Salvina. James found Mike's passport and a note indicating he'd be there in 6 hours in the room. Still, James sensed something was amiss after waiting for Mike's arrival for quite some time and eventually left the hotel. James then phones Rusty, who explains that their goal has been leaked and that the police are beginning to hunt them down, and James wants to know where Mike is. Mike, he added, never came back to give in the study data, so he naturally believed he had perished en route. James was then told by Rusty to provide their whereabouts so that Rusty could arrange for a pickup. James, however, has second thoughts after meeting Rusty's representatives in person and opts not to travel with them because he believes Rusty to be Mike's killer. His intuition was spot on. Shortly after James turned around, an enraged Rusty gave the order for James to be captured and killed. Hearing gunfire, James made a hasty escape from Rusty's thugs. His pursuers finally gave up the chase after he took down 2 of Rusty's men while hiding beneath the bridge aisle. James was able to find out that Rusty had dispatched assassins to kill the man upon pickup by inquiring as to who had sent them. James then used Rusty's cell phone to send a brief message giving the impression that he had died, fooling Rusty into thinking James had abandoned him. James slept in the subway station after his long journey and deliberated his next move. Suddenly, he recalled the copy of the research material he had concealed in the bank vault, as well as Salim's cool words. James visited Salim the following day and asked Salim's wife to retrieve a copy of the research data from the bank for him. Salim's wife first rejected James' proposal, but after he threatened to hurt her son, she had to comply. James was given the information by Salim's wife when they returned after retrieving it from the bank vault. As soon as James received the information, he went to look at Salim's previous studies. When Salim was revealed to be a regular scientist after accessing the data, he seemed astonished. To combat a global pandemic virus, the latter was working on a vaccine formulation. He plans to give the vaccine away for free to anyone in need of it, but others have their sights set on stealing the vaccine's formulation from him. In light of this new information, James resolved to use the passport Mike had given him to return to the United States. Upon his return to the United States, James visits Mike's home to deliver the tragic news that Mike has passed away. However, James is shocked to learn that Mike is still alive and immediately suspects that he and Rusty plotted James's murder. James begins to tail Mike incognito the next morning in an effort to learn his true intentions. Mike, however, seems to have anticipated this because he promptly set up an ambush for the folks who had been tailing him all day. Mike's expression of astonishment when he realized it was James was understandable given the news he had received from Rusty that James had been killed during an earlier expedition. That's why Mike skipped the planned hotel pickup and instead traveled to the United States on his own. He had no intention of betraying James, thus it was Rusty who was playing with both of their emotions. James, on the other hand, nearly murders Mike for misleading him about the mission's true objective and Salim's scientific findings. James' family is in danger if Rusty learns that James is still alive, so Mike warns him not to go back. After hearing this, James concluded that killing Rusty in his guise was the only option. Mike, who has some guilt over what happened with James, plans to assist James in his plan to rob Rusty. James will sneak into Rusty's house through the back that night while Mike acts like he wants to see Rusty. Once James and Mike began picking off Rusty's men one by one, a ferocious gunfight broke out. With no one left to protect Rusty, Mike and Rusty took their own lives by firing against each other. Then, without another word, James went over to where Rusty lay dying, and James hurriedly took Mike to the hospital when they finished their plan. But Mike died from his injuries on the way. James burnt Mike in his automobile the next day to destroy the evidence and return home to his family. James plans to depart the United States with his wife and son after they are reunited. Finally, the end comes. The lesson to be drawn from this film is that we should never betray people who have gone to great lengths on our behalf.